Hello everyone, welcome to the Brookbanks Podcast. I'm your host Ben Wakeling, the head of cost commercial here at Brookbanks, and today we're diving into the world of sustainable drainage systems, or SuDS, which is a topic that is becoming increasingly important. And joining me are two fantastic guests. I've got Andrew Wilkinson, director of our Land Development and Communities Group, and Paul Coombs, senior engineer in our civil engineering team. And we'll just start by asking both Andrew and Paul to give a brief overview of their career history and their experience, just so that we can all be rest assured that they know what they're talking about. Paul, we'll start with you. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hello, my name is Paul Coombs, a senior engineer at Brookbanks, as you mentioned. I've been in the industry for about 20 years. I started off working for a house builder, Taylor Wimpey, as a management trainee, so go around departments there, commercial and technical, and spent about 8 years there. And then redundancies, or recession kicked in, so then moved across to a storage manufacturer as a design manager. I spent a bit of time there, and then moved across to software company, Micro Drainage, which is the drainage design software, which is sort of industry standard in the UK. It's used abroad as well. But I spent a few years there and then moved across to Amy Consulting and generally worked on highway projects for local councils and national highways as one of the puddle pirates there. I spent about 9 years there and then recently came across to join Brookbanks, who deal with residential engineering, as you know. So I've been here for about a year now, and being a drainage sort of lead, I've very much focused on drainage, so aim is to drain, as it were. Over to you, Andrew.
Many thanks, Paul. Morning all. So I'm Andrew Wilkinson. I'm a chartered engineer, chartered civil engineer. I've got around 30 years experience in the industry, mainly in consultancy. Started off many moons ago with Atkins on a graduate training program, and I've worked through various different size consultancies, then a small civil structural consultancy, through to a huge consultancy in WSP in my last position. Been with Brookbanks now around 6 months and really enjoying it. Sort of worked historically on a range of sectors: retail, residential, commercial, industrial, logistics, education, the whole range, with both private and public sector clients. Worked both sides of the planning hurdle, so both with the pre-planning side of things, drainage strategies, flood risk assessments, that sort of thing, but then also post-planning, detailed design. So I got a good idea about what is planned and then what is actually implementable. So yeah, and when things get sticky, of course, as well, I can step up to the plate and get involved with planning appeals and public inquiries.
Do you have a catchphrase like aim to drain, like Paul does, or are you still working on that?
I'm sadly still working on that, Ben. Yeah, it's going to take a while to trump that one, to be honest.
It is, yeah. As long as you're not aiming.
It was my birthday last week, and I'm now putting the age in drainage. I mean, I could give you.
God. You dedicate a lot of time to coming up with these catchphrases.
I love a bit of drainage, you know.
Don't give up your day job.
Yeah.
Well, happy birthday for last week. So,
thank you.
So this podcast is designed for those who are fairly new to SuDS, as well as those who perhaps know a bit about it and want to understand a little bit more. So we'll start simple. Paul, what are SuDS?
SuDS are wonderful drainage systems, so sustainable urban drainage systems, or SuDS. Traditionally, they're thought of as like open-top ditches or planted ditches, which we refer to as swales. Traditionally, we tend to pipe up. Well, we remove surface water from, let's say, pavement, and then we put it through a pipe system and then discharge it off-site. But that's all underground, and it deals with volumes of water, which is great. But a more sustainable way of doing that would be through use of things like SuDS structures, such as swales. And the idea is that you can slow the flow down off-site, so you can control the flows at source, essentially, a bit of source control. Then you not only just dealing with the volumes of water, you're dealing with water quality and pollutant transfers as well. Then there's a range of benefits to SuDS, as opposed to previously a volume sort of focused solutions or traditional systems, because you get multiple benefits to the amenity, biodiversity, and so on. So whereas before we used to just deal with volumes of water and getting rid of things flooding off site, now with SuDS structures, because I refer to different items as structures, with different SuDS structures in place, then what you can do is slow the flows down and make the environment a nicer place to be, really, which is good for butterflies, diversity, all that sort of thing, the birds, wildlife, people. I'd much rather walk alongside a nice planted ditch than a few manholes in the road over a pavement. So SuDS is an old sort of technology, really, but generally thought of as like swales, which everyone will see as a planted ditch. Yeah, lots of other solutions are available. It's not just swales that we put in place.
And as you say, it's always, if you're on a new development that's just completed and you're walking past a detention basin or a swale and it's nicely planted, as you say, it's much better than just walking past a whole swathe of concrete that's got a load of drainage under it. So it's got added sales benefit, I should imagine, or at least more attractive to a potential buyer. Good. Andrew, anything to add on that?
Yeah, only I completely agree with that. It's placemaking is at the heart of everything we do now in terms of master planning and designing projects and places for people, essentially, and having these sorts of this green infrastructure through these new developments is a fantastic thing for both amenity value for local residents and visitors, but also that biodiversity value that Paul mentioned as well. So yeah, all good.
Yeah, and I think there's a real push at the moment for across all sectors and most people around sustainability and green infrastructure and so on. And Paul, daft question, but what is it about them about swales and basins that makes them sustainable? Is it just the fact that they are natural, in inverted commas, and therefore you don't have to spend an awful lot trying to fix it if it goes wrong?
Yeah, I mean, generally it mimics nature more accurately than hard engineered solutions. So if you can just shape the landscape a little bit so it slows the flows off and deals with surface water runoff, then that's going to be easier to maintain. There is going to be maintenance requirements. However, as it's a lot more natural, you're going to get multiple benefits. Whereas if you were to just bury things underground, then that's going to need a sort of more heavily engineered or heavily maintained network, which it could clog up over time. Whereas at least with SuDS structures, you tend to find that they're a bit more accessible from the surface, although they may be in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of a field. So, you may need wellies as opposed to just driving a truck up to a gully pit, for example, to suck a gully out. Great.
Sorry, I was just going to say, we were talking before we were recording, you were saying that the Romans would build swales alongside their roads.
Oh, they've been around for millennia. You think of the old Roman roads and you put a couple of ditches either side of the road to transfer the runoff, keep the horse carts all nice and dry here. So it's old technology, really, that we just adapt over time. Because if it works, we use it, really. But as it's a planted ditch, we call it a swale now. So it's slightly different to the Romans.
I think also, sorry, Ben, I'm just going to say, one of the key things for pushing SuDS within new schemes is the rate at which we're replacing aging infrastructure in our country, which I think from the most recent stat I've seen was one length of piped run every 2,000 years, which is a bit of a ticking time bomb in terms of infrastructure maintenance and replacement requirement. As you can imagine, most of the UPVC drainage systems that we put in these days are not going to be there in 2,000 years' time, far less than that. And they will be failing long before it. If they're beneath highways, then that is obviously going to cause disruption, potentially flooding for properties around the highway, but also, time when the highway needs to be closed for that repair to be made. And so I think, having SuDS features in the form of near surface solutions like swales, like attenuation basins, rills, etc., it gives us much more, it'll cause far less disruption in the future, and the cost of maintaining them, although I appreciate that there is ongoing maintenance in terms of grass cutting, etc., ultimately that will result in a far more cost-effective scheme at the end of the day and less disruption overall.
That's a really alarming statistic about the lengths of drainage runs being replaced. Was it one every 2,000 years? Yeah,
once every 2,000 years. In the UK, I believe that Europe are ahead of us quite significantly in those terms. I think it's around 1 in 200 years, which you could imagine perhaps some of the drainage systems stretching to. At the moment, we're relying on the relic Victorian sewerage infrastructure, which is very well built in the main, and with quality materials, and perhaps not designed within an inch of the design life. So yeah, it is quite worrying.
Just goes to show the importance of SuDS for longevity, as well as just being a nice thing to look at. Quite often it's quite worrying to think about all the crumbling pipes beneath our feet that could blow at any second, and quite often do. But there must be some challenges around SuDS. It can't all be benefits, and one of those is adoptions, I suppose. So speak a little about adoption challenges around basins and SuDS.
Yeah, I mean, despite the technology being relatively old, it's not exactly new age tech that we're dealing with swales and what have you. The way we transfer assets, it can be quite tricky when you're dealing with the range of solutions on offer with SuDS. Costs can be a bit of not a stumbling block, but it can be quite an issue in us producing costs for commuted sums, for example. For when we transfer across assets for adoption, we need to have a payment set aside so that it can be replaced if needed. And agreeing those costs can be quite tricky. So I like a calculator. I love numbers, but generally when it comes to money, pound signs and things, I go blank. I give you the numbers of the volumes and things and the meterage of pipe lengths and what have you, but I don't really look at the cost too much because I'm looking at what's going to work as opposed to how much it's going to cost. So I kind of tell you what I need and then pass it across to you, Ben, to say, can you please make this cost effective?
That's where you come in. You draw the basin and we'll cost it up.
Yeah, a bit of a concept, and then how's it going to work? So but agreeing costs is very important to do. We've got to have a commercially viable solution put in place, otherwise we'd have all the drainage everywhere in the country and nowhere to live, but at least the land would drain itself, kind of thing. So commuted sums I find can be quite an issue. It'd be great if we just had a calculator for that, to be honest, like national calculator that we could all use, put in a schedule of what's required, and then it gives us a number that we can go to the adoption authorities and say that's how much it's going to cost.
As you love calculators, that might be your next project, Paul.
Yeah, calculator. I love a calculator, but carbon costing, commuted sum costing. There's all sorts of calculators that I think would be very useful, just to give everyone a similar sort of numbers to work with, a consistent approach in the way we deal with things. But as well as costings, because it's not always about money, it's about the sort of actual maintenance and making sure that the SuDS systems that we are designing are built as required. So we do have standards in place for that. So we get a set SIRIA guidance to guide the contractor and everyone on what we are designing. But also the maintenance. There's no point us putting things in the ground if they're not going to be maintained properly. So, passing that sort of information across is very key. But I think one of the key things, which I should have led with, but I'll finish with. But the key thing with SuDS, I would say, is making space to input these SuDS on site, because they will take a little bit more room. So we need bigger green corridors, essentially, to install these planted ditches, for example, or SuDS basins and things like that. So, but if we can make space for SuDS on a site, then we should find that the design can follow on and be built and costed and all the rest of it, and adopted with no drama.
But then I suppose some sites would, areas of those sites would lend themselves to SuDS. If you've got areas of made ground, for example, where it's not great for foundations and so on, there's your SuDS area right there, really, I suppose.
Can be, yeah, as long as we've got good soil. Need to do some ground surveys, make sure if we can infiltrate into the ground, then that's always really good for SuDS, because if you can have a leaky bucket, then you can let the water out of the bucket without it going through the spout, kind of thing. So with the spout being a discharge point for us. I think if we can infiltrate, then that's good, but if you're in rocks, then that's going to be tricky. Also pollutant, if you've got nice clean ground, that's good as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, in terms of made ground, that sort of immediately rings alarm bells for me in terms of, potential contamination, and there is, you don't want to be infiltrating through that medium and leaching contaminants into groundwater. So that's something that we're very, very aware, very conscious of. But there are still SuDS solutions that are implementable with the potential of lining systems so that it doesn't infiltrate into contaminated ground, and then conveying that flooded water down to an appropriate point of discharge. So there's definitely solutions that are available for those sorts of situations.
And with SuDS, we can provide interception as well, can we say? So there's cleaning of the water as it passes through the system prior to discharge, where we can infiltrate. So
it's a good point you make there, Paul, because that's a key part of the new national standards that we find being brought in now in England. They were released back in June of this year. And they set out the standards by which SuDS should be designed and also constructed for projects in the future. They're not mandatory at the moment, but they're being treated by many lead local flood authorities as material consideration, and we're being asked in many schemes to design to them. This is a bit of a precursor, I think, to the implementation of Schedule 3, which we had in Wales some 7 odd years ago, and we've got a set of statutory national SuDS standards, which I believe that the non-statutory version in England will become in perhaps next year when Schedule 3 is enacted. That was due to come in last year, but it's been delayed. Yeah, surprise, surprise. Another bit of legislation delayed. But I'm pretty sure that the direction of travel still seems to be the same, and it's a matter of when rather than if, I think, now. So,
yeah. And Andrew, just talk us through briefly SABs over in Wales. So you've got SuDS, now you've got SABs. What are SABs?
Yeah, so SABs that we refer to are SuDS approval bodies. So they are the organisations that have been set up to review SuDS applications that you're now required to submit in Wales on any development that affects more than 100 square metres of ground. So you can imagine, that's 10 by 10 metres. It's not a huge area, so it encompasses most of the work certainly we get involved in. It's perhaps just only small domestic schemes that avoid it. There are a couple of other exceptions. Trunk roads, for example, aren't wrapped up in that requirement. But for most schemes now, we need to submit a SuDS application to the SAB, which tends to be in Wales certainly the local authority. Quite how that's going to be rolled out in England with the county and district authorities, I don't know, but in Wales it's the local authority, and they then have a decision to make. They compare your design with the statutory standards, and they confirm that whether they comply or not, and that is their approval is mandatory prior to the construction of any works. So it's a really important thing to get right, and but there are also big benefits with it. There is the mandatory adoption. So, as Paul mentioned earlier, that we do have challenges often in adopting some of these systems that we plan through the planning application. We have fantastic placemaking plans and green infrastructure strategies. But then it gets to the implementation, and you're talking to the local highway authority about Section 38 or Section 278 works, and they simply won't adopt these features. And the same thing with sewerage undertakers and LLFAs. So it's fantastic that with the implementation of Schedule 3 and the advent of SABs, they will take on the maintenance obligations for the systems that you've designed that are required to follow those standards. And so that's a wonderful thing, and they will take on the maintenance for the longer term. The slight sting in the tail with that is that they drive their own commuted sums. And talking around calculators, there is a national calculator in Wales which gives each of these SABs a steer on how commuted sums should be developed for various designs. But the commuted sums do vary immensely in accordance with that design. It's sort of relative, and I think originally a lot of people were trying to save space by putting in a lot of permeable paving, for example, on schemes, so that you don't need to free up more land for green infrastructure and reduce your net developable areas. But actually what people then realised quite quickly was that will that will attract a large commuted sum, because permeable paving's only it needs to be replaced every 20 years. That's its design life. And in the SAB system, where design lives for the development are 60 years, not the 100 years, interestingly, that we design the residential schemes to in accordance with MPPF, but there's 60 years, and that needs to be then funded. Its replacement needs to be funded twice through that cycle, so that pushes the commuted sums right up. And in actual fact, then on reflection, you're better off of having given up some NDA to put in a swale, which improves the placemaking. You've got sort of biodiversity benefit, which can be beneficial from a BNG point of view, and they create generally better places that people can live in. It's like to be more cost effective than putting in that permeable paving. So it's very interesting, the blend of design features that you put into schemes, and that can have a big bearing on its viability.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's not just a case of one or the other. It could be, as you say, a blend of a few things that work out best for water discharge, best for the environment, best for the customer at the end of it, if it's a residential scheme. So thank you very much. One final question from me, and we'll go to you first, Paul. What piece of advice would you give to a developer who's got a bare piece of land and wants to consider how best to implement SuDS?
Make space for the SuDS, and try and control the flows at source. Don't just put in a massive pond at your discharge point at the bottom end of the site. Try and spread the storage throughout the development, really. And you can use things like swales. I keep saying swales, but other SuDS features are available. But spread your SuDS throughout your network and try and slow the flow down off site. You can use things like rainwater butts and things, but for design purpose, we always assume they're full anyway. But if you put in like a rain garden, green roofs and things, then that can really slow the flow down and stop a little bit of volume going to your discharge point as well. So yeah, first off, make space for SuDS, and try and slow the flow down throughout the development.
A rain garden sounds exotic, but I bet it's probably not. What's a rain garden?
Nice bit of rock plants, but I mean, they should be used everywhere. It'd be great. But then where would you put your solar panels if they go on the roofs as well? So it's a trade-off. It's an interesting trade-off for us to do, but bus stops and things, it'd be great if we had them. Yeah. I could start going about heat-on effects in city centres and things, and that's very useful to have rain gardens in place in city centres, because it's basically keeps the water at the point of where it lands, really, and slows the flow right down. But
is that what they are then? Just what is a rain garden?
Essentially, I mean, they are planted areas, and not dissimilar to swales, to be honest with you, but with elevated outfalls, so that you get an influx of water. The idea is we talked about the interception requirements of the new standards earlier on, and the idea is to catch the pollutants from the first flush of runoff from a road, for example, which flows into these rain gardens, and that first initial flush of water is held within a rain garden. It's a trough, or it's a low-lying area beside the highway, for example, and it's only when you get heavier rainfall that water builds up within that planted area and then spills over into an overflow, that it actually drains into the system. So you capture a lot of the smaller rainfall events. The pollutants, as I say, which are from those regular washes of the road from rainfall, are captured also within that rain garden. That is, that they are treated by the medium they're flowing through. You've got planting in there which absorbs some of those pollutants, and the soils as well. So it's careful design around soil mixes in those areas. And then every now and again, that area is cleansed, if you like. It's sort of, the soil is taken out and the plants, and then they're replanted. It's not an annual event, but that's the idea, that it will become more and more polluted, I guess, as a body over time, having removed the pollutants, and those smaller amounts of rainfall just trans-evaporate or soak into the ground slowly. So,
I suppose on a residential scheme, you would have to make sure the residents were aware of the rain garden's presence and their function. Otherwise, they would just think, oh, there's big puddles everywhere.
Well, absolutely. Why is this not draining? And so, Yeah, there's a lot of awareness that needs to be put in place to support the SuDS designs. I mean, well, also another thing I've seen when retrofitting SuDS features into city centre locations, for example, you can engage with the community and ask them what they would like to plant within the rain gardens. So you get a bit of feedback on that, and some, give them a range of plants perhaps that will cope with that fairly wet environment, and then they're able to input and buy into it. So, and that helps with the education as well. So
that's a good idea.
Great.
But what I wouldn't recommend is just at the bottom of your downpipes in your house, don't just put a few plants and call that a rain garden.
Call it a rain garden.
Next to your foundations, please don't do that. It needs a well thought solution.
Good advice. And then Andrew, there's the same question to you then about developers. What would your advice be?
So I think my advice would be to plan early. I mean, it runs through most things that most disciplines we cover. Think early, get prepared with the whole of the design team, because these are, as we've talked about, multifunctional spaces ideally. So, it's engaging with landscape designers, ecologists, and the master planners, and also the highway design team. So it's not just about the drainage engineers, and it's certainly not about retrofitting a design once a master plan has already been developed. It's having that early engagement with the whole team, and then engaging with the LLFAs to understand what they will accept. And because it's great we've got the national standards now, but it's a framework for design, as it always is, as a national standard. It's not prescriptive to the nth degree, and there will be interpretations of that by various LLFAs and SABs when they finally come in England. So plan early, it would be my advice.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, it's been a pleasure to speak to you both. If anybody wants to find out more about SuDS, drainage, or Paul, your next catchphrase, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you? Paul, we'll go to you first.
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, or you can just email me direct. It's paul.coombs, Charlie Oscar Oscar, Mike Bravo Sierra, at brookbanks.com. No Ian Coombs.
Andrew?
Yeah, in a very similar way, LinkedIn, or at andrew.wilkinson at brookbanks.com.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Paul, for your time, for taking us through the world of SuDS. If anybody wants to find out more, they can get in touch with you. You've just given your contact details, or they can head over to the Brookbanks website at www.brookbanks.com, and there's a contact us link there, and you can get in touch. Thank you.